a moment. But hey, we want to invite everybody to join in the discussion that we're going to have this evening. And we have a special guest who's not unfamiliar with Let's Talk Nation. This person is a guest. This person is a friend. This person is also our former retired now Greg Jackson, chief of police. And we asked him if he felt it not robbery to give up his time this evening, give a few minutes, because as everybody's aware of what took place in Memphis, we cannot not have a discussion about that this night. So without any further ado, and Greg Jackson, nobody does the introductions like a Greg Jackson. He over there scrambling, y'all, trying to get his head set right. But Greg, and I'm not even going to do this person a disservice, man, to make these mild introductions of a good friend of our show.
No, absolutely. But, the only way to say it is that this gentleman has been a longstanding member of this community, has been a longstanding servant of this community, which is very important. And so it is with a great deal of pleasure, and you said it, Brother Love, a great deal of pleasure that we bring onto the airways our friend, our compatriot, and someone that we know that we can have these conversations with. And so we want to welcome Chief Orlando Rolón. Chief, how you doing this evening?
Good evening, gentlemen. How are you all?
Not too bad. Listen, you got a big smile on your face. You must be retired.
Retirement.
Oh, I hear you.
Well, Chief,
but the wife put me to work like 2 months later, so I'm working.
Hey, Greg, you know what I'm saying? The wife put him to work.
Listen, that's how it is.
Hey, Chief, we appreciate you taking a few minutes with us. And, man, we just wanted to reach out. And we've heard Orange County Sheriff Mina condemn what took place in Memphis. Also, Orlando Police Chief Smith. So we are taking it from a different vantage point because, man, we're talking to a retired chief, and we appreciate your expertise. But, Chief, really, if you would reflect on what did you see in that video that was broadcast the other night?
Well, let me tell you, the same reaction that all law enforcement leaders across the country and every citizen in this country expressed, the same reaction. It was just shocking, disturbing, undescribable how it really to do the right thing for these individuals to unfortunately not reflect what the true profession, in my opinion, does reflect across the country. The majority of the officers do perform their duties nobly and in a noble way. And these individuals, unfortunately, just put us back years.
Chief, what do you think of the speed that took place to arrest, to indict these guys?
So it goes to show that the country has spoken, and everyone who's involved in the process is listening. There are a lot of things that have to be taken into account. Contractual arrangements that are made between the unions and law enforcement entities. There is obviously the judicial process that must be taken into account when decisions like this are being considered. The fact of the matter is that everyone understands that it must be done timely. It must be done right. And in this case, both of those boxes were checked.
Chip, here's the hard question, because there's a very unfortunate aspect to this. And as you know, not only does this hurt the department, but it also hurts the community. But from the standpoint of the unit that these five officers were a part of, it was the Scorpion unit, which was a special enforcement unit. And apparently the Memphis police chief has decided to disband that unit. But that unit, from what I understand, Chief, was responsible for breaking up gang activity. It was also responsible for getting like 800 guns off of the street. Is that the appropriate response? I can understand a temporary suspension, but is the appropriate response to remove this unit altogether? Is that something that, because that's going to hurt the community as a whole?
So, I personally believe that you must do your due diligence when it comes to making decisions like this. You cannot quickly react to certain situations. In this case, to your point, you have to weigh how the unit has performed to date. What is it that led to this situation? Because obviously there was a problem. These individuals felt empowered to do what they did. But is it necessary to dismantle the unit altogether? In all honesty, I don't know. We don't know. I
Mm.
think, I think time will tell whether that was the right decision or not. Now, with that said, specialized units have a lot of power. Specialized units are given a lot of flexibility to perform in their capacity as a specialized unit. These individuals receive extra training. These individuals receive additional equipment, everything that you can think of to be able to go out there and target what unfortunately is beyond the scope of a regular officer who's out there trying to go from call to call to call. But there is a saying, right, that says that unchecked behavior, misbehavior that is ignored is condoned, right? So
Mm.
Mhm.
I think this is a message for all of law enforcement that we're quick to praise the great work that our officers do. But I think it takes a bigger leadership to actually address when officers are not performing to the standards that our citizens expect and the profession expects from our officers. Meaning, if you do have these specialized units, and of course, all of them, for the most part, are doing great work, you also have to make sure that you keep everyone in check, that you make sure you have mechanisms in place to follow through and double check body worn camera videos, that when discipline needs to be rendered, discipline is rendered, that you
Mm.
just don't snap one in the hand and say, hey, don't do it again. No, hold them accountable, because if they're a specialized unit, they should be held to a higher standard.
Well, Chief, you're hitting the nail on the head. And, one of the things that Greg and I heard you speak at a community forum, I think this goes back 2 years ago, when you spoke about the duty of fellow officers to interact, to intercede. Chief, these five guys, not one of them said, stop.
Right.
So that is obviously a question that many law enforcement agencies are probably asking, when they're having a discussion about what happened in Memphis. For the last 2 to 3 years, actually the last 5 years, it's been ingrained to every new officer who's patrolling our streets. Your duty to de-escalate, your duty to intervene. These are like common pillars that the law enforcement profession now basically adheres to. But what led to these particular individuals to basically break those cardinal rules? It's the part that I think most law enforcement leaders and members of the profession are probably asking themselves. As a citizen,
Uh,
now of this community, of course, I was asking myself, how can that have occurred? It just made no sense.
Chief, as a lifelong servant of the community, specifically in law enforcement, I want you to just tell Let's Talk Nation, in your honest opinion, is what we saw in Memphis the rule or the exception of what law enforcement officers are? In other words, is this that dreaded 5.05% that we talk about, or is this what law enforcement is all about, what we saw in that video?
Absolutely not. Coming from someone who spent nearly 30 years, a minority, who spent 30 years in the law enforcement profession, who rose through the ranks to become chief of police, I'm telling you, if I had ever thought that the profession reflected as a whole something like that, I would have quit a long time ago. And I think that's something very important to keep in mind. There are over 800,000 law enforcement officers in our nation patrolling our communities on any given day. Over 18,000 law enforcement agencies, right? And if you take into account that on any given year there are millions and millions of contact with citizens across the country, and for the most part all you hear is positive things, that's something that we must remember. Now, one point that I think sometimes gets ignored is the fact that each community must ensure that their policing is done properly. And whatever happens, many states away from your community or even a neighboring community should never be seen as a reflection of your local law enforcement agency. Hold them accountable. Make sure that they're doing everything right, but don't put them all in one bucket whenever someone, like in this case, basically is acting, has basically taken a situation or a position where they are not performing to the oath that they took to serve and protect and to do things right.
Chief, we're not going to hold you that much longer, a couple of more minutes. But one of the things that I have to say, man, is this really provides the merit for the type of work that another good, not just a good friend to the show, but a good friend to communities and law enforcement across the country. This Dr. Randy Nelson, who goes in the communities, work with law enforcement and work with communities as a part of community engagement. And we're not by any means condemning the profession, because we believe the profession is not only needed, but it's a noble profession. What we will do, though, is condemn when we see acts like that. And we also got to go ahead and respond to the leadership, because the actions were swift.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I could not agree more.
So listen, Chief, listen, as always, we appreciate you for your time. And listen, you didn't even have to do this. You're not even officially in the capacity, and you're still out here, a good friend of Let's Talk Nation. But most of all, we want you to know that we're here. We're wishing you the best. And it's good to know that you're still out here and that you're still doing some great work, man. Great to see you as always.
Thank you. Thank you. Tell the First Lady we said we appreciate robbing you of a few minutes. All righty. All righty. Hey, for those of you who were listening, that is our former Orlando Police Chief, Chief Orlando Roland, who, we appreciate his expertise.
Listen, that is what that is what leadership is about. And Chief Roland, for the the time period that we got to know him, when he was first announced as the Chief of Police, and he was hit with a rather interesting issue right off the bat, and we had a chance to get to know this guy, for real, about what he states about being transparent, about acting swiftly, and we didn't even have to call him the task. Right. I mean, he did it, and whenever there were things going on, people don't know, how much he would lean on us and call on us, and how much we can lean on him and call on him. And so we want to say we greatly appreciate Chief Roland for not just being a friend, but being a friend that can talk to us about tough issues and about things that are taking place in the world.
And Greg, I'm glad you mentioned that, but also, man, Orange County Sheriff, John Mena. Greg, he was very swift in coming out and condemning based on what he saw. And that's the kind of leadership, man, that we're looking for throughout not just our state of Florida, but throughout the country.
But listen, it's not hard to condemn wrong when you're doing right. And I mean, when the other situation with George Floyd took place, Chief Roland in his official capacity at that time was one of the first to step up and say what was done was wrong. Chief Mena did the same thing. Chitwood did the same thing. Lima did the same thing. You're right. But these are true leaders in in the areas of law enforcement. And so, when they see things that are done untoward, they have no issues with stepping up and speaking out. But the other thing too, though, Brother Love, is we want to remind not just Let's Talk Nation, but we want to remind anyone who's looking at the situation to say that this is not the norm. This is not what law enforcement is about. And I'm happy to see. I don't think I've heard anything, and I know Doc is always scanning the airways to see what's going on, but I haven't heard of any protests, anything that has been as destructive as it was during the summer of 2019. And so I'm glad to see that people are not acting as violently to this particular circumstance, although this circumstance is equally as horrific as what we saw with George Floyd. But I'm happy to see that they're not acting out as violently. But I see Doc just jumped on. What's going on with this thing, John?
So, one of the things that the professionals are pointing to is the fact that the response was so quick and so it's basically they listened to the people, and because of that, they were able to control the situation regarding the protests, and they were not violent. And people are giving them credit, the Memphis Police Department, for being transparent and really allowing the people to express themselves. They had no arrests in any of the demonstrations in Memphis. I think it got a little rough in LA, but that was a whole different situation. But one of the things, and I wanted to pose this question and I'll drop back off. I looked at this video several times, and one of the things that jumped out to me was the fact that they were able to beat this man basically with bright lights flashing in the neighborhood, and nobody came out their house.
saw the video, and Doc really is pointing something out, Greg, because nobody came
Nobody
out of
came to intervene. Nobody came out their house. So, and Chief Rolone was right. To disband that unit so quickly, it makes you ponder really what other things had transpired that led to that quick decision. That's just me being curious. But I noticed that, and I've watched the video repeatedly because I wanted to understand how.
But you know what? Go ahead, Doc. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but how do you lose so much of your humanity that you would beat a 135-pound man? Okay, every one of those officers weighed over 200 pounds. So basically 1,000 pounds beating on this little boy.
Doc Nelson often talks about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a time when relationships matter. He talks about having chips in the bank because we know times like this will come. And it's going to come down to what level of relationship does the community have with law enforcement and law enforcement have with communities? Because as you mentioned, we didn't see any of these protests really get off the rails. And
I have a theory on that, but I want to go back to what you just said and kind of tie it in with what Doc just said, because you said it's about relationships. But we also know that there are different types of relationships. You have loving relationships, you have giving relationships, but you also have abusive relationships. And what Doc may have just pointed out is that in the city of Memphis, unfortunately, there may have been an abusive relationship between law enforcement and the community when police officers are committing this type of act. People just kind of turn the blinds eye because that's just their relationship with law enforcement.
Greg, would you say, and I see where you're going, but would you say that it could possibly have been that type of relationship with the community and them knowing what this Scorpion?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay,
that's what I'm saying. So when we talk about relationships, you're absolutely right, because when we talk about it, and we talk to Doc Nelson, because Doc Nelson is so positive on in building a good relationship between the community and law enforcement, sometimes we forget that there are two types of relationships. And I take it back to a marriage. You can have someone who's in a loving, caring marriage and someone who's in an abusive marriage that they just keep going back into this abusive relationship. And maybe the unfortunate relationship that some communities are in are abusive relationships where they are accepting of these things with law enforcement.
Greg, to your point, and here's something that we refer back to Dr. Nelson because he's an expert. The training that he does. But, here's, I think, in large part, something that makes a difference. Doc talks about not having those partnerships. Those partnerships you can walk away from, Greg. Those partnerships are just what you reduce to writing on paper what everybody said they're going to agree to.
Right.
A relationship is something that you don't walk away from.
Right.
And so, I think more dialogue. But Greg, you said you also, or you or Doc, that you had some other thoughts about.
And I have a theory. I have a theory about why it is that the protests are not as violent as they were with George Floyd. And my theory is that in this particular case, they can't point to law enforcement and say that this is a race issue. It's unfortunate. This is clearly a behavioral issue within law enforcement. And so now no one can say, the black community is being oppressed because these white officers are doing this. Now this is 5 black officers who have committed this against a black individual in the community. So how do you go out there and get bucked when it's really and truly you that's on you?
Interesting that you should say that, my brother, because here's what I'm going to lay on you.
Okay.
Something that disappointed me greatly.
Okay.
A couple of nights after this took place, the family held a vigil.
Right.
Greg, you know how many people showed up?
To the vigil?
Yeah.
Of the family?
Yeah. In the community.
Am I going to be surprised?
You're going to be surprised. And I was surprised.
1,000 people?
No.
How many?
About 50 people showed up. Now, it goes back to something that you're saying, man. We need to condemn acts like this regardless of the race of the officer that's committed. Condemn it. And we saw at a later date, you had more people get engaged in this process. But Greg, wrong is wrong.
But now, maybe that might not be a reflection of law enforcement. Maybe that may be a reflection of the young. Unfortunately, it may be a reflection of the young man or of the family in that community. I mean, that is something. Listen, if we gonna be real and talk to folks about it, we got to be real and talk to folks about it.
But Greg, I think the community initially would have come out up in arms, man. Come on, I mean, let's not hold back on it, Greg. 50 people show up, and you understand what took place with this young man. I just, man, it's hard for me to get my arms wrapped around that.
Doc, what you got?
Well, his family, according to the news accounts, his family was well liked. He was he'd never been in trouble. You know, he was a young man that had a son, and his hobby was photography. In fact, that's where they say he was coming from, taking pictures of sunsets. That was his hobby. He worked with his stepdad and his coworkers. They got together afterward, and and held a vigil with the dad. This is his stepdad that raised him. But one of the things, and this is why I popped back on, because I'm going to push y'all button. Where was Black Lives Matter?
In California, throwing a party in that mansion that they got.
Hey Doc, you can stay on when you're having those type of conversation. And come on, man, we gotta put it out there.
Yeah, because if this isn't a wake up call for Black folks, now y'all know I was very much pro Black Lives Matter because I understood the structure initially that was launched around the movement. Okay, I actually went to some of the meetings and stuff, and many of the chapters weren't associated with the national. You got to understand that. But the national has tarnished and trashed the name so bad because they have failed to do anything with regards to any of the issues that Black people continue to deal with. Social justice, okay, poverty, education, any type of training. All they're doing is buying houses and paying their friends
and raising money. But something else, Greg, and Doc, Greg, you two, go ahead and give me your opinion on this. Do you think what's taking place is moving the needle at all as it relates to police reform? Because I believe it was today that a staunch United States senator out of the great state of South Carolina proposed some compromise, Greg, and you more than likely know what the compromise was. It was compromise based on qualified immunity. Mm-hmm. Greg, can you're the legal scholar in here, can you tell the audience what qualified immunity is?
I mean, just the the long and short of it is that police officers, as long as they're in the course and scope of their duty, are allowed to do their duties without any question, so to speak. So it's assumed or presumed that if they commit some form of act, they were doing it under their official capacity. And so you can't criminally prosecute or go after them unless it is some egregious act like what we saw with Derek Chauvin, whatever his name is, and George Floyd.
Does that include civil action as well?
So civil action to an extent, because they would fall under sovereign immunity, which sovereign immunity for municipalities mean they're capped at the amount that they would be held liable for unless they do a claims bill, which you're probably familiar with coming through the legislature and things like that. But yeah, it could be a civil issue as well.
So I guess back to my question to the both of you. Mm-hmm. Do you think, unfortunately, tragedies like this is moving individuals that have been immovable over the past years?
Listen, this is what people have to realize. And I realized it because I've done ride-alongs with sheriff's officers and things like that. And you've done them too, Brother Love. I don't know what time of night you went out there, but I went out there from 6 a.m. to 4 a.m., 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning.
That's the time that's when you get to see what's happening.
And there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the wee hours of the night that, us good citizens that's home in our beds watching TV don't know about, that law enforcement are having to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so the thing of it is that law enforcement is a very dangerous job. And it's one of those jobs that when they walk into a room, they cannot assume that everything is okay. So they walk into a room at 100 anyways. Now, good, bad, indifference, but that's where the training comes in. But you have to, with when you take away qualified immunity, what it does is it makes officers less willing to take chances to do their job, which, it sounds crazy to say they got to take a chance, but sometimes they have to take a chance. They have to be willing to run up into a house where someone is shooting and take a shot because they're doing their job. If you take some of those things away, they may not even be willing to go to the house, much less go into the house. So you got to weigh it. Now, obviously in situations like this, where it's clear as a whistle or clear as a bell, sovereign immunity doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And Derek Chauvin says sovereign immunity did not matter. In cases of the young lady who was shot in her apartment, sovereign immunity matters in those cases, but they still got to justice in that case.
Greg, you use the terminology, and Doc, stay with us for a minute. Okay. I've heard the best terminology or mentality, if you would, coming from Seminole County Sheriff Dennis Lima, when we were sitting around his conference table, and he said he doesn't necessarily like to refer to what law enforcement does as law enforcement. He likes to look at the concept of policing. We're policing one another. We're policing our actions, our interactions. And, that was a totally different concept to me. Listening to Sheriff Lima is the chair of national law enforcement boards. But when you hear individual talk about, hey, look, that is something that we do, but I like to refer to what it is we do as us as a community with policing one another. And so I think if we can get our arms around some of those concepts, Greg, I think we can look at community, because communities have a role to play in this as well. But man, what we're talking about tonight, it's unbelievable that we're still witnessing this type of stuff.
Yeah. What you got, Doc?
I think very much that I think the behavior is changing greatly, because I think many officers are starting to understand now they can be caught up in a situation by the actions of their peers. And that's going to make a lot of them think before they take these vicious actions like this. But at the end of the day, I'm not a policeman, okay? And the closest I got was when I worked in juvenile justice and stuff, and with the JAM unit, so we did community control, and I did ride-alongs with them and checking to make sure that the kids were in for curfew and in compliance with their community control. But Greg is right. There's a whole different life after 2 a.m. that's out there. Yeah. And, I understand the stressors and things that law enforcement goes through. I really do. And I think now you're right. They will be second guessing themselves a lot more. Do I run behind the suspect into his house? Okay. Do I pull this car over? What's going to go down? And I don't think that's necessarily bad, but we've got to get to a different place with law enforcement and the expectation. Again, I'm going to say this, and I always say it, we put too much expectations on law enforcement. A lot of the calls that they get are mental health calls that should be handled in a much different way.
Right. But you know what? We have witnessed, Greg. Doc, we witnessed, and I don't remember what agency this took place in, Greg. I know it was down south somewhere, where we saw this one deputy, a police officer, that intervened with their supervisor, who happened to be a sergeant. And we saw this on film with her pulling him away from the guy, and then he turned around and, as we all remember, grabbed her by the throat. And I think he has since lost his job, but we just don't let it need to go without being noticed that we recognize when law enforcement steps in.
But let's also be real about this as well. And Doc, you may be able to help us out, and I don't want to put you on the spot on this, but you may be able to help us out with this also, just from institutional knowledge. But what profession has the largest suicide rate?
You're right.
Or what is one of the professions with some of the largest suicide rates?
Law enforcement.
And it's one of the, I mean, law enforcement, military,
Yeah.
you know, it's the professions that have these stresses put on them to where in them trying to do their job to keep other people safe, sometimes, I can't even call it.
The whole field of first responders,
Yeah.
the whole field
Yeah.
of first responders has the highest suicide rate across the board. Firefighters, EMTs, police, they all have extremely high suicide rates. You know why? Because the human psyche is not designed to undergo the stressors of trauma that they witness. That's PTSD.
Yeah.
These guys are off the chart PTSD many times, and they're not getting diagnosed because people say, "Oh, you're supposed to be tough it out." We expect that. We have a social expectation that police are tough and they can't complain. They don't, they run into the fight.
But it's a thing of police officers or people in those industries are the ones that people come to when they have problems. Who do the people that people come to for problems go to when they have problems?
You're right.
Some of the people who I have come to love and appreciate the most are pastors, because I've been able to have real conversations with pastors, because most pastors can't have conversations with other people. Now, they might be able to have conversations with other pastors, but outside of that, if they can't talk to another pastor.
Yeah.
So I've had the unique experience of being able to talk to people who deal with people who have problems when they don't have anybody else to go to. So just imagine, Brother Armando, if every day you walked out of your house to go to your job, you knew that there was a 75% chance that you were going to be shot at or killed. How would you feel going out to work every single day with that type of stress? I mean, you might as well be a freaking coal miner going into the mines, digging coal.
No point in working at that point. Working from home.
Working from home. Hey, we're having a serious conversation here, and if you're tuned in, we're going to ask you to join the conversation. The telephone number is area code 407-894-1680. Once again, that number is 407-894-1680.
So, but listen, Brother Love, I do want to pivot just a little bit because there are some updates from the topic that we were hitting on last week. And we had a great conversation about HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, and, some of the struggles that HBCUs have. And in particular, it came up with regards to BCU and what BCU is going through, and with Ed Reed. And I would tell you, initially with Ed Reed, one of our initial thoughts was, hey, Ed did this, but maybe you went about it the wrong way. And I'm starting to reevaluate that, Brother Love.
Talk to me. Talk to me,
maybe,
General.
Maybe Ed was on to something, because what Ed has done is Ed has forced a conversation, a very uncomfortable conversation, about not only what's taking place at Bethune-Cookman University, but what's taking place at HBCUs across the country. And because we know that Deion Sanders went and coached at a HBCU, but Deion Sanders was very quiet and reserved about what he had to deal with. Ed wasn't in the job long enough to tell us everything, but he was there long enough to open.
He wasn't even in the job. He wasn't even in the job. Hey, but Greg, I see where you're going with this. But
yeah.
here's something to me, and to your point. Do you realize after the Ed Reed situation that just started taking off, I can't remember what other HBCU, but the coach of the HBCU got his team together and started walking the campus picking up trash.
Was it Eddie George?
Eddie George.
Yeah.
Eddie George.
Yeah.
And it stimulated some conversation out there. I don't know who was telling us about some of the amount of funds that HBCUs received during COVID.
Well, listen, it wasn't even just during COVID. Roland Martin, to his credit, has been doing a stellar job of investigating. He's an investigative reporter of investigating and pointing out what's been taking place. And one of the things that Roland Martin pointed out is that BCU, even before the hurricanes, because remember, BCU is saying that the mold and stuff was taking place because of the hurricanes, all of this stuff that's taking place. And he's done a good job because folks have reached out to him and said, no, here is documentation to show that I was talking about this in March of 2022, months before these hurricanes. Here are photographs of mold months before these. Here's photographs of roofs leaking inside of the dorms months before the hurricane. So he's done a good job of pointing out that these were issues before the hurricane, because that's what they keep pointing to. But then he also received some information. I think he said he got it from Representative Clyburn, who basically gave him a list of funding that HBCUs received. And I think that the total funding list was 6 point something billion or maybe 4 point something billion. But out of that pool of money, BCU received $68 million. $68 million that they received.
So what's the verdict on what those resources were spent on?
And that is the conversation that Ed Reed has indirectly sparked from his rant about this football coaching job.
Well, Greg, I think more conversation are going to come of that, but I got to point out something else, man, that, you know, you can Google it and you see a whole bunch of headlines pop up in regards to it. Greg, now all of a sudden, the new headlines are billionaires are no longer going to invest in HBCUs. Greg, Deion Sanders did an excellent job at Jackson State.
Yeah.
He pulled resource. We saw they got so many different uniforms, Greg. They look like
Florida State.
Yeah, I ain't gonna say no Florida State. I'm not even gonna say the Gators. But Greg, here's to my point, man. I mean, because I think, you know, everybody has their style. The way Ed Reed did this, it drew awareness to a systemic problem. I'm gonna go ahead. But Greg, some of the things that you're hearing now that billionaires are going to turn away from, Greg, if Deion Sanders, what he did at Jackson State, and he brought the corporations, he brought the millionaires to the table. I think now there's, folk are sitting back using this to hang over the head, particularly at BCU, to say now you're not going to get the investment from billionaires. But Greg, if the purpose was to help the school, and again, I know you're talking about accountability, but Greg, these same folk shouldn't turn their backs on those kids in that university now.
This is my position on that, Brother Love. BCU and no other HBCU should be dependent on billionaires to fund the dreams and the aims of their institutions. That's the alumni's job. And I'm going to tell you, last week, Brother Love, I sat here and I was very transparent and I was very honest about the fact that, I write checks. And I write checks to one of my alma maters. Well, actually a couple, because even Leon High School gets some money from me. I love me some Leon High School. Go Lions. And I was very transparent and I said, I write checks to FSU. And I have another alma mater that I don't write checks to. I said, but I don't write checks to Florida A&M University. I just don't. What was the why to that, brother? What was the why? I'll talk to you about that in a second. Now I do support FAM because my daughter is there, so they get my money indirectly. But after this, Brother Love, because part of the issue that's taking place with BCU is an issue with the alumni not supporting the school. And even the interim president of BCU said that alumni giving went from, which is a ridiculous number anyways, and I'm not saying ridiculous as it's great, because it's ridiculous that they only had 12% of the alumni giving back to the school, and we don't know in what amount. So it wasn't a great deal of money. And it went from 12% to 1%, which is absolutely ridiculous. And so I'm recommitting myself to where if I'm going to talk about it, I better be about it. So I'm recommitting myself to start supporting my HBCU, not just with my child being there and putting money there that way, but to purposefully set aside monies like I do for Florida State. Every year I get a call from Florida State. Now, I don't think FAM has ever called me, which is crazy to me. FSU calls me, and maybe that's why I don't get, but FSU will call me every single year. Mr. Jackson, we saw that you gave last year. Yeah, absolutely. Matter of fact, double what I did last year. FAM hasn't never called me, but you know what I'm gonna do for FAM? I'm gonna call FAM, and I'm gonna start feeding into my HBCU in hopes that other folks at the BCUs, at the Tennessee States, at the whatever you want to call, whatever your HBCU is, we as alumni need to start supporting these schools so we're not looking to billionaires or other people to support our programs.
And Greg, didn't we have the same conversation about the alumni, the difference between PWIs and HBCUs? We had this conversation, man. And I think it was loud and clear that the difference is in the alumni giving. Now, I'm going to say, with the exception of some HBCUs that have experience, and Tennessee State being one of them, where after 50 years, now they realize that the state
owes them money. Yeah.
owes them millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So it does come down to alumni participation and engagement.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, BCU, listen, for all of the trouble that you all are hearing about your university and all of the troubles and stripes that people are laying at the feet of your university, listen, we support y'all. And, one of the things that we want to encourage the BCU community to do, and listen, I understand if somebody was calling me about my school, don't tell me what to do. That's my school, ain't none of your business. But listen, this is our business because it's our community. And we're encouraging BCU to not just go to the football games, not just classic it out, not just fish fry it out, but seriously sit down and start writing checks to your alma mater. Write checks. Don't football games are not supporting your school.
You're right. And you know what, Greg, I'm gonna go ahead, man, and give a quick shout out to birthday guy who was also a FAMU Rattler, and he just happened to beat me real bad this past weekend in the game of golf. But Greg, it's resonating, man. Ron Jab Williams is joining us tonight, and it looks like for the first time. But Greg,
apparently he's joining in to rub it in.
Yeah, I know, Jab. Jab, good game this weekend.
Hey, he like D-boy. All you got to do is see him drive around down the street and you get nervous.
Hey, but and him and his wife are Rattlers, man.
But good, listen, go Rattlers, man.
But Greg, you definitely. I mean, and we talked about this before. I don't know that we stopped talking about alumni support of their schools, but man, Greg, we can only spread the word.
Nah, absolutely. But listen. Here's the other thing too, though. HBCUs, your board of trustees, you all have to understand what your role is to the university, but more importantly to the students that select those universities and the parents who entrust you to the lives of the young people that they raise for 17, 18 years and send to your esteemed universities to protect them. Because that's really and truly what HBCUs are there for, what they were established and set up for when we had nowhere else to turn. We had our HBCUs, we had our church family, we had our school family, and these HBCUs to some extent are failing these young people. And so, the challenge, not just to the alumni hold your board of trustees and your administrations accountable for the things that they are not doing, because the more you turn a blind eye to it, the worse it's going to get. And then you're going to have an Ed Reed popping up on your campus pointing out all the stuff that you don't want to hear. But I mean, in this case, Brother Love, you needed to hear this because I had no idea. Did you know the BCU doesn't have a track?
I did not.
Did you know that the football team does not have a locker room?
Come on now. What you mean don't have a locker room?
They don't have a locker room. This is the type of stuff that's been coming out.
See, Greg, something I think you're doing tonight, maybe you bringing Rattler Nation out tonight, because I see another Rattler has joined us, Mr. Darren Smith. And Greg, what's up with the Rattlers coming out? We talking about BCU, but we talking about HBCU.
Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something about Florida A&M University, brother. Brother Love, Florida A&M University builds some of the toughest, most resilient individuals in the whole wide world. But they also build leaders, brother.
They build leaders,
and they build people who have no problem with speaking their mind. That's one thing that we learned on the campus, on the highest of 7 hills at Florida A&M University. You will speak your mind. And so, yeah, when you hear one Rattler talking, you're gonna see a whole bunch of Rattlers coming around because we don't speak nothing but the truth, man.
Well, Greg, man, I appreciate that, man. But I also want to, man, shift a little gears here to something that's in your alleyway, man. Greg, speak to us about the Army officer, man, who was pepper sprayed in Virginia.
Oh man, this is crazy. And I know y'all remember the story. And Doc Polite, I know Doc probably remembers the story. It was a first lieutenant in Virginia, and he had stopped off at a gas station, and these police officers came up to his car. Something had happened. They wanted him to get out of his car. He didn't want to get out of his car. They all over the internet, everywhere, on the news and everything. This first lieutenant in the Army, serving this country, doing nothing wrong. And these officers snatch him out of his car and they spray him, pepper spray him, embarrass this guy, all of this other stuff, wrongful detention. And so he sued him. And I think rightfully so.
But something that he said, if you watch the video, which in my opinion is going to be more so ever apparent now, when he said, I want to pull over in a lighted area. Yeah. And we're seeing more and more individuals when those red lights go on, they're driving further than that immediate stop, and they're driving to areas, Greg, where more people are around and it's a lit area.
Right, and it's a good thing because
Yeah.
it was video and
Safe,
people saw it.
yeah.
But I think most of the footage off of this was off of the body cameras
okay.
of the officers. But anyway, so he sued them, and like I said, rightfully so. And so he was suing them for $1 million. Now, first and foremost, probably wouldn't have gotten that because, again, this is a municipality, sovereign immunity reigns. So there's a cap. But, you sue them, maybe they'll open up a claims bill because this was something ridiculous. This was egregious. This was shocking to the conscience.
He wasn't
of what
charged?
people saw. No,
He
it wasn't charged. It wasn't charged. And so this case went to a jury, all right? A jury of his peers, presumably, or a jury of his peers. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to do that to the legal system. That's what it was, a jury of his peers based on the sampling of the community. They saw the evidence. They heard the same things we heard. They saw the same things we saw. And the jury came back with the verdict. And it was a verdict in favor of the first lieutenant. All right. The problem was it was a verdict in favor of the first lieutenant that was nowhere near what he was asking the jury to award for this egregious, ridiculous situation that we saw him undergo. So this jury, Brother Love, and this is why I tell my clients, I have no idea. I had a client ask me, it was a case came up, he said, well, Greg, how good are you? And I had to tell him, not that good. If you expected me to sit there and tell you that a jury's going to do X, Y, Z, I'm not that good. And I'm not going to sit up here and make you believe that I'm that good. But that aside, I always tell them juries are unpredictable. I have no idea what they're gonna pick up on this, that, and another. But long story short, this jury came back with an award, total award of $3,600.
How does that happen, though, Greg? Man, come on. I saw that. How does that happen, man?
It's ridiculous. Listen, I just told you, juries do things that I can't explain. And in this particular case, it's not that they didn't believe him. What I think it was, and this happens a lot of times, and I tell my clients this too. What happened was, when you go into a courtroom and you ask a jury for a certain amount of money, sometimes you make that jury mad. Because what people don't realize, all right, when you ask for $1 million, I want people to, I really and truly want people to sit back, and I want people, and I did this not too long ago, I want people to add up the annual income, like the normal everyday American. Add up your income, multiply that by your annual income, multiply that by the number of years that you're going to work. And if you're not making $50,000 a year, okay, and that's before tax. If you're not making $50,000 a year, you're not going to make it to $1 million before 20 years. That's assuming that you're making $50,000 a year. Now, if you're making less than that, it's going to take longer. Now, let's put taxes into that. So that $50,000 quickly becomes about $30,000 that you're actually bringing home. All right. So that $30,000 means that you're having to work 33 years or more to get to $1 million. So when you're sitting in front of a jury and you walk in there, your limbs and everything intact, you may have gotten a little embarrassed. Your eyes may burn a little bit, but you want $1 million. People are going to say, I didn't even make $1 million in my whole lifetime of working. That's a lot of money to ask people for in certain communities.
So great. Does that take us back full circle to have you really understand the audience you're speaking to?
You have to. And you cannot assume that what angers or inflames one part of the country will anger and inflame the country, the part of the country that you're in.
Well, I'm going to move us on, Greg, but before I move us on, let me say this. And you are somebody who told me this 5.5 years ago. For those of you who heard Greg Jackson say something to the extent that he said to somebody else, he wasn't that good, man, come on. I'll bet on the general any day. And those of you who are listening, Greg Jackson is an attorney, and if you need his services, Greg, how can people connect with you? What's that number?
So yeah, if anyone ever wants to talk to me about a case, anything like that, I do personal injury. That's my thing now. But 407-564-6604, that's the number where you can reach me again, 407-564-6604. If by chance, Brother Love, if they're watching television and they see all these commercials with this handsome blonde-haired guy with blue eyes,
Not you.
That ain't me. But I work with the man. So if you ever feel like you need to call Dan Newland, ask to speak to Greg Jackson, I'll contemplate if I want to take your case. How about that?
And let me just co-sign. Greg Jackson, the general, is good at what he does. So, hey, let me, Greg, let me ask you this. Florida judge upholds Governor DeSantis' suspension of the state attorney, Andrew Warren. What you know good about that, man?
So remember, this was the case where after the Roe v. Wade, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, This particular state attorney said that he would not prosecute someone, for doing an illegal abortion. That's basically what he said. Similar to what Aramis Ayala said about she would not, seek the death penalty on any cases. And so, similar to what Governor Scott did with Aramis Ayala, Governor DeSantis basically said, if you're not going to do your job, I'm going to remove you from this post. And you remember this, Brother Love, because there was a lot of conversation about this, and it was my little pea brain against these $1,000 hour lawyers. And I was telling them the whole time, Florida Constitution is going to uphold, is going to support what Governor Scott has said. Nope, it's not going to do it. $1,000 an hour lawyers, and my little pea brain and I, we were right. As whatever. I'm not going to do that.
Told you the general's good now.
Yeah, and so Governor DeSantis removed this state attorney. The state attorney took him to court, similar to Aramis Ayala. And the judge in that case, Hinkle, who's actually an attorney out of Tallahassee, as a matter of fact, I remember when he was practicing law over there. But Hinkle, who's a judge over in that area, basically said that Governor DeSantis may have violated the First Amendment rights of that state attorney, basically saying that this guy has a right to say what he is and is not going to do, will or will not do. That is his right to say it. But it is the governor's right and role or obligation in his role. If he feels that someone is not performing their duties, then yes, he can remove them from that office, and that's what he did. And so he basically said the judge kind of took a different route, which is kind of surprised. I thought that Hinkle was a Republican, but now that I sit back and think about it, I don't believe he is. But he basically said that it would be up to the legislature to reinstate, this state attorney. But he did not step in and overturn what DeSantis did, once again reaffirming that the governor has the ability to remove individuals from an office if they say that they're not going to perform their duties.
So, Greg, so that's done. There's not an appealable process to it.
It's appealable, but the Florida Supreme Court would have to pick up on it. And guess what the Florida Supreme Court is made up of?
Gotcha.
All right. So,
gotcha. Well, Greg, I know we're winding down, but man, this is a piece that, we've had multiple conversations about it. Man, talk to us a little bit about the documents, man. And for those of you who are unaware, we're talking about classified and top secret documents that were found at the now president's at his private office, and some documents were found at his home. But those documents, Greg, and correct me if I'm wrong, are documents from when he was in the Senate.
Some from in the Senate, some from when he was vice president. But yeah, that is correct. Joe Biden, who basically derided Donald Trump and said that he should be prosecuted for having, classified documents on his property, that there's no excuse for that. As we know, 3 weeks ago, they started going through his items, and they, lo and behold, found that he had classified documents in his possession. The biggest difference, though, is that Donald Trump's items were in one location behind lock and key, and the DOJ, despite what they're saying, the DOJ actually had come and he showed them where the documents were, and they were the ones who told them, hey, just put a lock on that door where they are. And then they came back and raided. That's how they knew where to go. It was in one location. With Joe Biden, these documents are spread out different locations, one of which is in a garage in his house that his son, Hunter Biden, who has ties to the Ukraine and Russia and China, had access to these documents, or presumably had access to these documents. And so a lot of people are trying to say, well, there's no difference in what Trump did and what Biden did, and Biden is being forthright and forthcoming and doing all of this other stuff. No, he's not. And the bigger difference, though, Brother Love, and the greater argument in Donald Trump's favor than it is in Biden's favor, is that when Trump removed the documents, or when the documents were removed, Trump was a president. And who has the ability to declassify documents? The President of the United States. At the time that Joe Biden removed those documents from either the Senate or from his official role as vice president, he did not have the ability to remove the classification on those documents. So he should not have had them either way. So there's a huge difference between him and Donald Trump.
Well, brother, let me just tell you one of my observations here, because not only, former President Trump, not only our sitting President Biden, but you also had then Vice President Pence,
Mike Pence.
Documents have been discovered in his home or possession. So, Greg, I think there's a systemic problem here. I think if you go back, presidents and vice presidents, the archives office is going back now asking former presidents. Yeah, and Greg, you think something simple. You got a library process. When you check out a library book,
Yeah.
they know what's missing.
This is an issue with the National Archives, obviously, because no president, and to Biden's, as a vice president and as a senator, to his defense, he does not pack up those documents for the most part.
But hold on, stop right there, Greg. Stop right there.
Yeah.
When, and we don't know this process, but when does United States senators get to remove classified and top secret documents out of the SCIF?
Listen, to whatever extent, to whatever extent, he doesn't pack those things, or he shouldn't have packed those things. Now, I think the ones that are at his house are more problematic. I really think that there is some there. And to that point, even Mike Pence, he did not pack up those documents. Donald Trump did not pack up those documents. They just happened to be in some documents that were in their homes and their possessions.
Does the name Sandy Berger ring a bell to
It
you?
most certainly does. It most certainly does. But here's what's even more interesting, right? And so and I know he's gonna lean on his brother card for this one now. I know he's gonna put a lean on his brother card for this one. But apparently they have asked former President Barack Obama to willingly open up for a search of classified documents at his residence or in his possession, and he has declined. so brother Barack, he gonna be leading us in a little bit. He gonna need us in a little bit to come to his defense.
Greg, man, they should be knocking on everybody's door right now with as many documents that are floating now.
Listen, the National Archives should be ashamed of themselves. I'm not gonna, as much as I don't like Biden, I think that he's an old man who shouldn't even be president right now. I've said that time and time again. I don't like him. I think that
You call it oxygenarian?
he's an octogenarian. He's he's going to be an 80-year-old man talking about running for re-election. He needs to go somewhere, sit down, and enjoy. He needs to be like Henry Fonda on Golden Pond. That's how I feel about him. This is my day of Festivus. If me and the 6 other black people that used to rock Seinfeld, this is my day of Festivus, my day of airing grievances. I don't like Joe Biden. Never did. Never will. I didn't think he should have run for president, but here we are right now.
Here we are.
But as much as I don't like Joe Biden, I don't think that this is something that he purposefully did, but he should have kept his mouth shut when things were turning on Donald Trump. Just because you don't like someone doesn't mean that you try to step on their neck when they're down.
You're right. Well, Brother Jackson, man, I think we've covered quite a bit, man. But I tell you what, man, the best way to bring it back home, man, is how we started, man. I want to thank former and retired Orlando Police Chief Orlando Rolón,
Absolutely.
for allowing us, man, to tap into his expertise. But again, man, Greg and you said those names. We got leaders out there, man. Sheriff Lima, Sheriff Mina. Who am I missing? Greg Chetwood over in Volusia County.
Don't forget the Popkin.
And Chief McKinley.
Yeah.
All right, Greg. I'm glad you keep me out of trouble, man. But you know what, Greg? It goes back to this. I mean, what those guys, what we witnessed them do on the body cam, man, they should be not only condemned, but they need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
Just go ahead and setting them up a cell right next to Derek Chauvin, and
you're right.
They could start a kickboxing class together in prison, because they're gonna need it when them prisons get hold of.
And I think it's important for us, Greg, to we're gonna condemn that, but man, the profession, to the men and women that are out there doing their job every day, we're gonna say we're with you, but we need to continue to act swiftly based on what we saw take place.
I mean, the proof in the pudding, Brother Love, is the number of law enforcement who came out early.
Yeah, you're right.
Not at the pressure, but came out early to condemn what took place. And that should be the proof in the pudding for communities that law enforcement knows that this is not right.
It's getting faster and faster, General. You do not have to go home, brother.
But you got to get out of here.
Until next Monday on Let's Talk Nation with the General. Hey, y'all, come and join us, and we're going to have some more conversation. We'll see you next week. Hey, Pastor Stubbs, we appreciate your support.